In a dilapidated house at the edge of a small, quiet town, where the shadows danced and the wind whispered secrets, was what was supposed to be my wife and I's paradise. Our once grand home now stood as a decrepit monument to the relentless march of time, haunted by the echoes of a life long forgotten. But the true horror in my heart lay not in the crumbling walls but in the shattered fragments of memories that tormented my every waking moment. My wife, Maddie, was a prisoner of her own mind, ensnared by the cruel tendrils of Alzheimer's disease. Each day was a descent into madness for me as I watched helplessly while the woman I loved slipped further and further away. The walls of our home bore witness to the horrors that unfolded within, the air thick with the scent of decay and despair. As night fell, I would often find myself wandering the darkened halls, my footsteps echoing like the tolling of a funeral bell. In the shadows, I would catch glimpses of my wife, her eyes vacant and hollow, a mere shell of the vibrant woman she once was. But it was not the sight of her vacant stare that chilled me to the bone, nor the sound of her whispered gibberish that sent shivers down my spine. No, it was the sense of dread that hung heavy in the air, the feeling that something sinister lurked just beyond the edge of her perception. So, in case you couldn't tell, nights were the worst. That's when the darkness seemed to seep into our very souls, twisting our thoughts and filling me with an irrational fear. I'd find myself lying awake for hours on end, listening to the creaking of the floorboards and the howling of the wind, my mind awash with images of horrors, both real and imagined. In those moments, I could almost feel the weight of Maddie's presence beside me, her frail form a constant reminder of the nightmare we were trapped in. But it was not only the physical manifestations of Maddie's illness that tormented me. It was the memories of their life together, now tarnished by the cruel hand of fate. I would find myself lost in reverie, reliving moments of joy and tenderness, only to have them ripped away by the harsh reality of the present. The photographs that adorned the wall served as cruel reminders of what once was, our once smiling faces a mockery of the tragedy that had befallen them. And so, at least on my end, I lived in a perpetual state of terror. My mind was a battleground where the forces of light and darkness waged an eternal war. I selfishly longed for release from the nightmare that had become our lives, yet feared what lay beyond the confines of our crumbling sanctuary. For in the darkness, lurked horrors far worse than any imaginable. And so we remained, trapped in a prison of her own making, haunted by the echoes of not only the forgotten but the remembered, which can prove to be far worse. Just 11 short days until our anniversary, dear heart. I glanced at the calendar to my left, not even close. We got married in the spring and are currently approaching the middle of fall. Still, it doesn't do much good to correct her. She only gets upset when I do that. I mean, we're all getting older. You never wake up younger than you were the day before, that's for sure. Memories become harder to hold on to. Your brain becomes a colander for memories, and the holes get larger every year, or hell, even every month sometimes, the older you get. So I nodded and smiled without a word said. What else was there to do? Maddie had been by my side through everything, the loss of a child, car accidents, surgeries, and the death of our own parents. We'd been together for over 40 years, soon to be 50, God willing. I've been on this earth long enough to know what you get robbed of with age. At least she recognizes who I am today. If I keep calm and patient, this could very well turn into one of her good days. It had started with small things, and she wasn't exactly organized to begin with. It wasn't uncommon at all for her to misplace her keys or search for her glasses for ages before realizing they were on top of her head. The kids caught it long before I did. Then again, you never want to believe the worst about the person who holds your heart, now do you? Besides, Lord knows I had my own health issues to deal with. I'd been sicker than a dog left out in the rain for the past few months. Doctors couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong with me. My two largest fears constantly waged battle in my brain. If she went first, I'd be beyond devastated. The only thing I could think of that would be worse is if I died first. Of course, there was an absolute certainty that one of those things would happen. There was no lesser of the two evils. Both outcomes left us dealing with a labyrinth of pain and suffering too large for us to deal with. I looked at my wife sitting at the kitchen table and found myself painfully wondering if she would even realize I was gone. The Keurig machine our daughter Alma bought us finally gurgled to a stop, breaking me from my inner diatribe long enough to prepare 2 cups. The creamer bubbled lightly at the top of the cup before diving to the bottom, begging for a good stir. I filled a spoon up with sugar before dropping it into her cup. Yeah, I imagine the sugar isn't great for her, but at this age, who fucking cares? She's always been my sweetheart, and I aim to help keep her that way. I carried the cups to our kitchen table, wincing as some of the morning's liquid sloshed over my cup onto my hand. As long as it wasn't hers, it's okay, I thought to myself gently. People often ask what the secret to a long, healthy marriage is, and I give the same answer every time: always think of them first and with love. Of course, it helped that we didn't have social media, where sex is available at the click of a button sometimes. Maddie gratefully accepted her cup, smiling at me. I've always adored her smile, it melts my heart even after all these decades. She cleared her throat lightly before attempting to speak. This is delicious, just what I needed. Thank you so much, Daniel. My heart froze for more than a few seconds before plummeting to the pit of my stomach. I hadn't heard that name in years, and I was hoping never to hear it uttered in our home again. Daniel Williamson had proven to be the largest challenge of our marriage. Daniel Williamson was the man who almost broke my family apart 20 years ago, almost made it to where I'd be sitting here alone today. Daniel was the man whose affections were too strong for my wife to resist. It began innocently, a fleeting glance exchanged between them here and there, like a spark igniting a wildfire. Soon, clandestine meetings in dimly lit cafes became the norm, whispers of forbidden desires echoing around the hollow chambers of our dark bedroom. As hard as it was to admit, I felt a creeping sense of unease, like a cold hand trailing down my spine in the dead of night. Shadows danced in the orbs of her once warm and inviting eyes, casting doubts upon the love we once held so dear. As the affair spiraled out of control along with my paranoia, I found my soul ensnared in a web of lies and deceit, each thread pulling us deeper into the abyss of despair. My once vibrant spirit withered like a flower deprived of sunlight, replaced by a hollow emptiness that echoed through the halls of our strained, distrusting home. One fateful night, when my suspicions reached a boiling point, I confronted my wife in a whirlwind of confusion and anguish. At first, she tried to deny it. But in the dim glow of the moonlight, her confession ultimately hung heavy in the air like a noose around her neck, tightening with each word of utter betrayal. She began to walk toward me, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night like a mournful dirge. Shadows danced around her, whispering secrets of old infidelity and deceit, their icy fingers tracing the contours of her broken heart. We'd decided to work it out and make it through this, not for our kids but for us. It was one of the hardest periods of my life. And up until recently, I had thought it was long behind us. She interrupted my thought process. Danny, promise me the box is okay. When's the last time you checked it? I truly didn't know what to say. You know, if Brody finds it, we're dead, right? This is the point where I'd shamefully had enough. Maddie, it's me. I'm Brody, and I certainly don't wish you any harm, dear. A startled look assaulted her eyes just long enough for me to notice before she shook it away. You're not Brody. You're proving it now by actually listening to me. He never did. Feelings, thoughts, opinions, he didn't want to hear any of it. Told me I'd make a terrible midwife. Here we go, an argument settled decades ago, rearing its ugly head for a new round. Maddie was young and bored, and like many other women presented with an empty nest during the hours her children were in school, she started binge-watching TV shows. Netflix featured a show called Call the Midwife, maybe some of you have even seen it yourselves. Well, 6 seasons in, and all of a sudden, Maddie was convinced she'd found her calling. Just like she did with cooking and jewelry making and crocheting and all of the other phases of life she clung to. Well, I wasn't exactly the most supportive, and apparently, she never forgave me for it. After ensuring she had what she needed for the moment, I went upstairs to gather laundry so she wouldn't have to worry about it. There was a good chance she wouldn't notice anyway, but why fix what's not broken? Laundry still needs to be done after all. I checked the kitchen camera and found her still sitting peacefully staring off into space. So, I used that opportunity to fix up the bathroom and clean up in the event of any accidents that Maddie had. The sound I heard after closing the door to the upstairs bathroom wasn't one I'd ever heard before, and hoped to never hear again. When Maddie and I were younger, and the kids were well, kids, we could always tell who was coming up or down the stairs by the sound their steps made. Torin was a clomper. That girl couldn't sneak up on anyone to save her soul. Mason took each one a foot at a time, so it was 2 clunks for each step. Whereas Christopher ran, taking 2 or 3 steps at a time. This story was posted from user NM Brown on forum www.creepypastastories.com.